Hi there. Well, it's week 2, so I thought I'd check in and do another one of these really nerdy videos, so you can see me and hear me. And rather than responding, individually to all of your discussion posts, I thought I would do this really quickly. So I have finished reading and grading all your discussion posts and response for week 1. I grade really gently. We're just getting started, and I want to encourage you all to continue to engage earnestly with the material. And you're all doing really well. I really like the responses. A couple in particular I thought were especially insightful. And I know a couple of the readings were very challenging. A lot of people find reading Andrea Smith for the first time really difficult because she's such a heady academic. But we're going to read more of her work as the term goes on. But yeah, there's some really nice engagement with these ideas about what is racism, what is race, what does the term women of color mean, why do we use it, what is oppression, and now I want you to start thinking about what it is not. So I saw a few discussion posts that started getting into kind of murky area, which is fine, about perhaps being like, here's how racism looks in different spaces. It doesn't look the same all the time. That's why it's kind of hard to nail down. And I see you grappling with that, and I like that a lot. But also want to caution you to steer clear of this idea of you can only be a woman of color or only identify as a woman of color if you have a certain skin tone. I saw a post in particular that was about, and it reminded me a lot of my own experience with friends and family of mine who are Native but are very, very fair. The term women of color doesn't necessarily mean exactly that you are darker complected. More, it means your community, your family, those things, like where you come from, are communities that are oppressed as a result of white supremacy. So many Native people, for a host of reasons, right, look very light, but are Native people and may or may not identify as people of color when it serves them politically. So I'd like to caution you just to start thinking about that. It's not so much whether or not you pass as white or not, although those situations are certainly hairy. The term women of color more means about political solidarity, or when it serves you politically to use that term and join arms with other women of color who experience oppression similarly. So that's something I saw that I just want you to be thinking about. But I'm really pleased with how you're talking to one another. I know these subjects are really difficult to speak about, and I think you're handling it in a very professional way. And I see a lot of earnest engagement and earnest questions with each other about how do we talk about these things, or I like this point, or I agree with you, this is what I thought also. And I think that's great. Okay. I posted on the news bulletin thingy some questions I'd like you to think about as we move into week 2. So progressively, as the weeks go on, I'm going to start grading a little harder, both your discussion posts and, of course, your assignments. The idea is that you're building on skills. So week 1, I'm gentle, that I want everyone to post, of course. Week 2, I start demanding a tiny bit more, as we go. I want you to engage very specifically with the text because it's an online class and we're not speaking. We don't get a chance to make ourselves very clear. I'd like it if you pointed to specific places in the text rather than just more general strokes. So as we go on, just work on building those skills of referencing a specific thing an author says, connecting it to something else another author says, and then explaining your point of view on it or how it helped you figure something out or whatever. Okay. So work on specifics. And then it also helps me to understand your understanding of the text. So it's kind of a primer for me to see where I need to step in and provide a little more guidance. And then it helps me to understand your written work more. So when you turn in your first big assignment to me, or your first formal assignment, which is due this Wednesday, the 1st, it helps me to kind of see where you're going and to see where you need my help. Okay. So for week 2, our topics were moving from what is race, what is racism, what is oppression, what is white supremacy, how do these things work in the lives of women of color, why is that important to know? And we're moving forward with these definitions into our main, the meat of our coursework here. And we're starting with beauty. So this idea of beauty, we're a very visual culture. Certainly we're inundated with any number of ads and movies and things. And now we all have social media like nonstop. I draw the line at Instagram. I don't understand Vine and stuff, but this is another thing. But we're inundated with images like all the time, and very often these images reflect an unrealistic beauty standard. But beauty means something very different in the context of white supremacy, in the context of patriarchy, in the context of ableism, right, colonialism, imperialism, and it certainly affects the lives of women of color somewhat differently than white women. Not all the time, but it has different implications, or it has a different context, a historical context. So let's talk a little bit this week about what is beauty. What does that mean when we say someone is or isn't beautiful? And particularly, of course, women. That's who we're talking about. So I'd like you to consider, where does this idea of beauty come from? Who says, right? Who says this is beautiful? What is beautiful? How do we participate in those things? Often against our own interests, right? How is beauty related to racism? Where is our idea of beauty? How do we click that into white supremacy? How is sexism, how are sexism and racism related? So how do these things like link up in these ways? Much the way that Andrea Smith talks about pillars of white supremacy. How would sexism and racism work together to make a beauty standard? And how would that affect the lives of women of color? What does it mean to decolonize beauty? We have an article about decolonizing indigenous beauty. What would that look like? What does it mean to decolonize something? Why would beauty need to be decolonized? When we think about that when you read that article. What happens if women of color decide for ourselves what beauty means? What if we set the limits for our own beauty, our own imagination? What might that look like? What do you think these authors would say to that? How do they talk about their own bodies? How do they experience being in their body in this culture? And how does that challenge the way we think about beauty? So these are the concepts I'd like you to think about this week when you do your discussion post and when you do your first discussion question and response, which I'm really, really excited about reading. Great. So we'll see you next time. All right. Bye.